Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Cornelia Holstrunk. I'm the Associate Director of the Keller Center, and I'm extremely happy to have Michael Ventura with us today. This afternoon's talk will be on empathic design, or how to put the experience above all else. The event is sponsored by the Keller Center and is part of the Creative Mind and Leadership series on innovation, design, and entrepreneurship. The series is really intended to engage the campus community with leaders in this area. And I can't think of a better person to represent the Creative Mind series than Michael Ventura. I had the great privilege of meeting him last year in the fall in New York City for the first time, and was immediately captivated by his body of work and his passion to put the user above all else in his design work. So I think you'll find the same thing when you hear him speak. So you may wonder why a center within the School of Engineering and Applied Science would choose to invite a visionary from the design world. So I want to provide a little bit of perspective on that. So most of you probably know that in 2005, the Keller Center was generously endowed by Dennis and Constance Keller. And it was created with the mission of educating leaders for a technology-driven society. Over the years, we've realized that entrepreneurship, innovation, and design are crucial parts in really taking a technology out into the market space. And this is why we are also focused, as of late, on the area of design. I want to also tell you that this past spring, for the first time, the Keller Center offered its first design course, actually taught by Professor Liddau. The course was called Creativity, Innovation, and Design. And I wanted to share just a couple of quotes with you from students who took this class, because I think it really helps sort of build the bridge as to why design is important, especially if you are interested in entrepreneurship, innovation, actually in almost anything. So the first quote says, "I have learned a lot of incredibly valuable lessons. I was able to take every single lesson and immediately find ways to apply it to my personal ambitions. What I've learned in this class has been seeping into my everyday life, improving my listening skills, speeding up my creative thinking in general, and improving my ability to empathize with people. Very different from me." The other quote says, "Creativity has become one of my central values, and it will be hard for me to go back to living without constantly thinking of how assumptions might be questioned or solutions might be designed into everyday life." It's in light of this that the Keller Center is really delighted to have Mike Ventura with us today to share his experiences with all of us. Mike is an accomplished entrepreneur and creative director. In 2005, he founded Subrosa, inspired by the idea of creating the best-in-class solution-agnostic strategy and creative company. Subrosa's clients include Axe, Diesel, Estee Lauder, General Electric, Kiehl's, Levi's, and the list goes on and on and on and on, including Nest, as I learned earlier today. As CEO, Michael is responsible for setting the organization's vision and its overall growth. Of course, he has quite an entrepreneurial background himself, even before founding this company. And he has also served as a strategist and creative director for developing campaigns for many other clients. So please join me in welcoming Michael Ventura. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks. Hey everyone. So before I go into the presentation, I figured I would just give you a little background on Subrosa so you have a sense of some of the things we do, and then you'll see how it applies to the presentation we have here today. So, I mean, the way I describe Subrosa is that we are basically the weirdest consortium of people who have landed in a building in New York City who are basically tasked with solving open-ended problems for clients. We don't get a traditional advertising brief a lot. It's not, hey, make a 30-second spot for television or things like that. What we get a lot of the time, and the reason why the company is called Subrosa, is that's a Latin phrase for conversations had in private. And so what a lot of companies come to us and tell us are their dirty secrets, the problem that they're trying to solve that they don't want anyone to know about, or the thing that is really difficult and they just can't crack the code. And so we have to be trusted to sit in the room, to hear that, and to understand how to move them down the field into the right place. And so one thing that our studio has developed over the past 10 years has been this process, and it's an iterative, ongoing thing. If I was to give this talk 5 years from now, I would imagine that this would be entirely different because it continues to evolve, but there are a couple principles that have held true. And so what I'll do is begin just with a little opener about empathy itself, and then go into some of the methodology and then ultimately the casework. But first, and this is the only crowd participation portion of this, I promise you. I hate forced fun more so than almost anybody else in the world. But I do want to ask, what are words that come to mind when you hear the term empathy? And just shout them out. You don't have to raise your hands or anything.
Compassion.
Compassion, exactly. It's one of the cornerstones of it.
Understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Listening.
Yep. Experience and what was the other one? Yeah, these are all the right things, and I think what a lot of companies are uncomfortable with is that these are not marketing words any of you just used, right? These are like human words. These are things that we think about and go through behaviorally every day. And so for traditional marketers or advertisers or chief strategy officers, they're a little more uncomfortable because it's a little closer to the bone. And so in order to get in there and in order to start doing things effectively, we have to teach them about why empathy is important. And it's important because at the end of the day, if you don't know who you're dealing with, if you don't know who's on the other side of the conversation, you're never going to be effective. And so one of the things that we've really tried to do before we even put an idea in front of a client is to really start to understand what's our empathic point of view. How are we going to behave as an organization with our constituent groups, whether they be customers, consumers, members of the media, shareholders, whatever it is. And once we start to understand that, and we start to understand how that will play a role in the various tactics and things that we develop on their behalf, then we can get closer to the center of the bullseye. So it works because it starts from one of the most fundamental places of human behavior. It starts from a desire to want to understand. And that's really, I think that's what makes Subrosa a special studio, is like we don't have a bunch of people who come out of the advertising world. We have anthropologists, and we have engineers, and we have content producers, and we have academics and everything in between, because these people have gone out in the world and they've worked at other places and they've realized they only get half of the experience. They either get very tactical or they get very methodological, but very rare are the opportunities where they can actually have both. And so at Subrosa, I think what we satisfy for people who have that interest in doing both is that they can be heady and they can be conceptual and they can be methodological, but they can also be connected to the output at the other end of the story. So as we get into cases, you'll start to see how that plays out. So who exhibits empathy? One more participation moment. So companies specifically, think about companies that you interact with on your day-to-day life or products that you own, things like that. What are some companies that actually understand you in your view, if any? Uggs. Why Uggs?
I mean, you know exactly what to expect, and they make you feel better.
Right, exactly. It's reliable,
Yeah.
right? Anyone else?
Apple.
And why Apple for you?
They make products that are really user-friendly. They know how to appease the customer.
Right. Yeah, I'm a big fan of theirs, not just because I have their phone, but I think that there are a lot of aspects of what Apple does that I think are really interesting, even down to, and we'll talk about in a second, but packaging. One of the things that people talk about with experience design is not just the UX that you're going to get when you're into the interface of a thing, but what's the first touch? When you open an Apple box, it's almost ceremonial. Like the way they've designed every little thing to unfold and be so clinical and like the perspective on every little bit and bob that's in there is amazing. It's been fully considered. They are thinking about you when they're designing that. They're thinking about what will someone feel like when they open this product and how can we make sure that it feels special from the second it comes out of the bag. As opposed to, we buy a lot of products and just test them in the office. And, there are other competitors in the telecom space who shall remain nameless, but you can take a couple guesses, who have terrible packaging experiences. And, they're like hard vacuum sealed and you've got to get the scissor out and you've got to do this and that. And they're sort of bundled in weird ways. And that immediately starts a bad experience. It immediately makes you think they don't understand me. And that's sort of what we try to help companies work through, be it in packaging or in advertising or in a variety of different areas. Everything is an experience. So the product is obviously one that's massively important. It's the form factors, it's the materiality, it's all of the things that you deal with when you touch and experience a product for the first time. It's the brand. What's the brand's name? Does that mean something? Does it mean something to you? How does it look? Where does it appear out in the world? Do they feel like they're part of the conversation with you, or do they feel like they're trying to shoehorn themselves into the conversation somehow? The packaging we just talked about, and then the marketing. And the marketing is really kind of the first line of defense for a lot of this, is how are we talking to our constituents? How are we presenting ourselves out into the world? And are we packaging and presenting our message in a way that's effective and that's doing the right job for our customers? So everything must be empathic in order for that to be successful. So how do you put the experience above all else? There are two things we think about a lot of the time. Whoop. Hello? Battery. I mean, I'm loud. Can everyone hear me? Okay. We'll go with that. Unless that bothers anybody. We're good? Okay. So objectivity and feedback. So when we think about these two things, on the objectivity side, you can't just go into the problem with an intention or with sort of a preconceived notion of what the solution is going to be. I think when we have ever done that in the past, we've failed. And that is, I think, the first folly of a lot of this type of work, is you can come into a client and sort of be fully loaded, and I've got the best idea imaginable, and this is going to be awesome, and then you present it, and it falls flat on its face because it didn't have that objectivity. You sort of sold yourself on the idea before you got inside and talked to someone else about it. And so how do we do that differently? Well, it's the inverse of having that idea baked in advance. It's getting feedback early. And so our feedback comes from a variety of different sources. It comes from customers, it comes from clients, it comes from salespeople, it comes from a whole litany of folks. We're working with a big automotive brand, and right now one of the big things that they're working on is their sales force. How do they change the way their sales force thinks about selling cars? And what are the different mechanics we can put in place from a feedback standpoint that lets them sell cars more genuinely or authentically? And so one way to do that is de-incentivizing their sales force, so they don't have to, they're not commission-based. Very simple tactic, but all of a sudden it changes everything. Do you want me to take that microphone, Beth? Yeah.
Yes.
We're back. So objectivity and feedback. Going into our methodology, there are four big... Kidding me? Really? Is it me? It could be. All right.
Are you touching that? Yeah.
All right, we'll see how it goes. Four big buckets: behavior, relationships, memory, conversations. Again, really, see, it's over. Really plain speaking terms. So these are not marketing speak. These are not things that feel like jargon. These are just real words that everyone knows what they mean. But what do they mean for us, and what do they mean for us as we're designing experiences for our customers? So the first is behavior. When we talk with our customers, we talk about what are the behaviors you want to create in the people you're going out to talk to. Do you want them to buy something? Do you want them to consume a piece of content? Do you want them to have a great experience as they walk into the store? What are the behaviors we're trying to elicit? And let's understand them, let's map them, let's build the UX around them, let's make sure that that behavior is well planned so that we get the best experience on the other side. Relationships. What is the nature of the relationship we're trying to create with this other side of the conversation? Are we looking for someone to be top down? We're just gonna talk to them, which some brands, that's the way they choose to operate, and that's fine. We have to define those parameters early. Some want to look eye to eye instead, and they want to be a peer to their consumers. But we have to understand the nature of that relationship early if we're going to create effective work on the other side. Memory. What is the lasting memory we're actually trying to create? When I walk out of the Apple store, what should stick in my head? When I walk into the automotive dealer, what is the thing that you want me to sort of immediately know and understand and hold on to? And then the conversation, what's the frequency? What's the tenor? What are the channels we're going to use? All of these types of things that are going to be really important because Every brand is different, every project is different. Some clients want to have comments open in every channel they operate in, and so that means if someone says something to them in Facebook, they have to respond in Facebook. And are they going to be prepared to do that? Are they going to be prepared to have the hard conversations, or do they want to just avoid them? These are the types of conversations we have with our customers. These are the types of conversations that I think build great companies. Because if you can't have a perspective on these types of things, then you don't have a perspective in the way you're behaving out in the world. So this is a prettier graphic. So empathy in practice. I'm going to take you through 3 case studies. So one is going to be about cultural and business shifting, and a company who some of you may be familiar with, others you may not. The second is going to be about changing the entire service design of not just a line of business for a company, but its overall perspective in a category. And then the third is going to be launching a new product for a very well-known household name brand. So we're going to start with Pantone. Show of hands, who knows this brand? Good. It's a New Jersey-based company. Everyone should know them. They are, one of the best and brightest, purveyors of color and color technology. However, when we first met them, almost 20 months ago, we asked them, how do you guys define yourself? What are you? And their answer was, we are an ink and chemical company. And it was the most devastating thing we could have possibly heard from these people, because it's like, there are so many more inspired words you could use to describe what this company is, but we're an ink and chemical company was the answer. And it showed what really sort of sat under the surface inside this company culturally. It was a company that lost its way, that sort of lost that North Star of why they started in the first place. We met them in the 50th year of their existence. So over 50 years, they had really kind of lost the road. And so our brief, going back to what I said earlier about sort of the dirty secret, if you will, is they said to us, look, we don't really know who we are anymore, but we sold the company about 3 years ago to this big conglomerate, and they've bought us because they think there's potential in us, but we don't know where our potential is. And so we need an objective eye to come in and look at us open-eyed and help us figure out where might we go in the future. So this was a quick snapshot we put together for them fairly quickly of what their business looked like the day we met them. So professional color tools is the stuff that you guys probably know about. It's the swatch books, right? That's the biggest chunk of their business. And this isn't necessarily in dollars. These circles represent the amount of time invested inside the company in terms of like mind share. So where do people actually think about the company the most? So professional color tools, big part of their business, spend a big chunk of their time thinking about it, largely B2B. Ticks over into B2C a little bit from an awareness standpoint, but generally that's the bread and butter of their business. Consumer products, so things like the Pantone coffee mugs that you see in museum gift shops and things like that, which oddly is actually the #1 selling coffee mug in the world. It's a weird fact, but it's totally true. Someone measures it. And so that is that consumer products business and that licensing business is another big part of how the Pantone brand gets itself out into the world. Color trend and forecasting, the third leg of the stool. It's important to them. It ultimately gets them to color of the year, which is a big thing that they announce every year, sort of like based on all the trends and research we do. We talk to fashion people, we talk to consumer packaged goods people, we talk to automotive manufacturers, and we know these are going to be the important colors in the year ahead and how these colors will impact trend in a variety of different industries. And then there's trade show, which really nobody thinks about there except for like 3 people, but it had to be on the graph for their 3 people who were going to be in the room. So what we said to them was, look, this makes sense. This is the picture that it is today. And this explains why you don't know who you are, because you're kind of a little all over the place. There's no center of the bullseye. There's no thing everyone focuses on. It could be rethought. And so we went through behavior, memory, relationships, conversations. We started talking about what do they want to actually start to be. And where we landed was a quick reorientation that got them here. And what we meant by this was, again, thinking about it from a mind share standpoint, those 3 legs of the stool are all critically important to their success. They all drive different sides of the business. They all drive growth. But some of them are starting to flatten out. So like obviously people print less and less every year. So making swatch books is not going to be the business that they're going to be in 50 years from now. So how do they start thinking about that? Now, how do they start hedging that before it becomes a big problem? Pantone in the US is a 96% market share holder. But 96% in a declining category like printing is not really the best way to be successful 25 years from now. So where else should they start to be spending more and more time in order to make sure as that declines, they've put the right investment in other places. But sitting at the center was color of the year. And their initial reaction was, why the hell is that in the middle? It's 2 weeks out of the year. It's like a little stunt. Nobody gives a shit. But why is that there in the first place? And we had a really good heart-to-heart about it with them. And we said, look, the reason why it's in the middle is because it is the most outward-facing, publicity-driving thing your brand does. And you've treated it like this little orphan off to the side. And it really needs to be the centerpiece of your business, because what it does is it validates all of those other things. Because you're right every year. Because when that color of the year is announced, it does show up on the Sephora counters, and it does show up on cars and on packaging and in everything else, because they know what's coming. And so if you put that at the middle, all of a sudden people are going to think about it differently. And in 10, 15 years, what we would hope is that the chart looks like this. And that color of the year centerpiece has allowed your color trend and forecasting business to swell to such a degree that that's actually the future of your business. And instead of being a purveyor of inks and dyes, you are a purveyor of color intelligence. And a company like Procter & Gamble or Johnson & Johnson or Ford will hire you to come inside and consult on color for them, because you know it better than they will. So when Ford's launching a new car, who should they talk to about what the color spectrum should be? That's a really sustainable business. That's not going away anytime soon. You have the furthest leg up than anyone else on this. So can we start to pursue this? And every light bulb went on in the room. And they just realized, oh my God, that's exactly what we should be doing. It's been staring us right in the face, but we didn't have the objectivity to see it. And because we started with these behaviors and these relationships and these types of conversations that got them to understand what actually is meaningful and good about their organization, this was an easier pill to swallow. And Danaher, their publicly traded parent company, saw this and said, this is exactly the road we want to sow, so let's continue going down that road. So how did that then start to manifest? Well, the first thing we did was we said, you need a tagline, because you don't have one, and because taglines help communicate this sort of thing during a company in transition. So Make It Brilliant was born. And Make It Brilliant obviously has a very nice play on words. We're talking about color intelligence. We're also talking about the brilliance of color. No surprise to anybody there, but it was great, and it worked on so many levels, because what we were doing was we were making a statement about what the brand will allow you to do. So again, thinking empathically, it's not what Pantone does for Pantone. It's what Pantone lets you do. That's ultimately going to be conveyed through this message. And so by changing that, or introducing that, I should say, all of a sudden people started to think about Pantone in different ways. And so to show you how that plays out a little bit, historically when they would launch Color of the Year, they'd make something like this, and they would use that one image for 12 months in banner ads, in Facebook, in print ads, at trade shows, and by month 3, people are bored to tears with seeing the emerald or the orchid or whatever the color of the year thing is. So instead what we said was, look, we know you don't have a huge budget. We know that you have a lot to do over the course of a year, communications-wise. How can we build you a platform that is going to stay leanly within the budget you have, but still stay fresh for 12 months? And so what we did instead was made a lot of those vignettes like you see up there. We made 12 of them, 1 per month. And so they only had a budget to shoot 12 shots. And 12 shots, even in the span of a year, 30 days of one photo is still going to get pretty boring. So instead what we did with those vignettes was every one of them comprised a month. So we shoot this, but then you can take in individual crops. And when different holidays happen, like National Squirrel Day, which is a thing, and Ice Skating Day and Chinese New Year and all of these other things, you now have assets that you can use in a variety of different places like Instagram and Facebook and places like that. And all of a sudden with 12 photos, you've got over 80 assets that you can keep fresh over the course of the year. And again, going back to the topic of this talk, that's being considerate of the listener, of the reader, of the watcher, of the person on the other side who doesn't want to see the orchid image a million times pop up in their Facebook feed as they're following this brand. So we got a letter, which I'm going to read a portion of to you, from the client at the end of this first phase of the project. I joined Pantone in October of 2012, totally in love and in awe of the brand. Many of the people here, though they still love the brand, weren't in as much awe anymore, which makes sense considering how many people have been here over 10 years. I tried to get the "this brand is amazing" spirit up, but it proved to be too big of a task. There was also a lot of disorganization here that led to frustration and again made the, oh my God, we work for Pantone, how cool is that, feel very scarce. Obviously, a lot has transpired over the past year, but I can attribute many of these changes to Subrosa. For the first time you visited our sunny beige Karlstadt headquarters, we all saw how giddy and excited you were to be at Pantone and working with Pantone. It made everybody stop and think how they used to feel, and that they still work for Pantone. With every presentation from your team, I watched my team become more engaged. They started to really geek out. I know there were other contributing factors, but you guys were the start. You were the catalyst. You took Color of the Year to something so inventive and new and made it feel easy when it used to be a burden for us in the past. You put your hands and minds into helping us execute stuff that made us all more and more excited. We all knew how cool this program could be, but you helped show us that even internally, we're capable of banding together and pulling off an amazing launch. And she goes on to tell us a lot of other very lovely things, but at the end she says what I think is probably the most important thing, which is that Subrosa changed the culture by changing the conversation. And all of a sudden, people were hanging these things in their cubicles and sharing them on their own personal social media when they hadn't done that ever before. And so all of a sudden, by starting to be aware and understanding and empathetic about consumers, we actually were able to shift the internal culture of the organization as well. And the relationship with Pantone has grown considerably since then, and we continue to do a lot of great work with them. Pausing for a sip, and then I'll talk about GE. So, General Electric has been a client of ours for 8 years. And in those 8 years, we have done a ton of really esoteric and strange and wonderful things. This counts probably among the top 2 in my book for the weirdest request ever. So they came to us and said, we have a problem in medical imaging. So, we make X-ray and MRI and CAT and all of these other machines. And we have a declining market share. Philips and Siemens have better medical imaging businesses than us. And we want to be first. We're General Electric, and we want to be first in everything. And so we want you to undertake something that will be a little challenging. We want you to redesign the mammography experience. Yeah. And so we said, well, we're not a healthcare practice. This isn't something we do. You know that's not something we do. And they said, it's fine. It's great. You're going to find the way. We trust that you're going to figure it out. Yeah, and so we said, fine, but we don't know what we're going to find out. We may come back to you and say, everything you're doing is right. You just don't have the same relationships that Philips and Siemens have at hospitals, and so therefore, it's not going to work. I said, we're willing to take that risk. We have to figure out a better way of being part of the medical imaging world, and we want you to microcosmically look at mammo and see what you can tell us. Okay, so we began. We laughed also first, and then we began. Because it is absolutely the most daunting assignment. And so what we did was in October, Breast Cancer Awareness Month, we opened this studio, free, open to the public, ground floor level retail in Soho in New York. And we invited in all of the usual suspects you would imagine you would invite in for something like this. We invited in doctors and patients and cancer survivors, and we talked with people about what their experience was like. And we found out a ton of interesting stuff. We found out why people get screened or why they don't, and sort of what drives them to that process. And a lot of the insights that sat inside there, some examples are, it's phrased like an appointment to find out if you have cancer. It's not phrased like an appointment for body maintenance, which is really what it is. It's something you should do regularly for good health, but the way doctors talk about it, the way it's talked about in the press, the way people perceive it is, I'm going for an appointment to find out if I have breast cancer. And so a lot of people would rather not know. And so we started to really unpack the lexicon and started talking with technicians and nurses and doctors, and we started to find that it was just ingrained in the language, that that's just the way they talked about it. And it didn't have to be that way, but it naturally was, and that was a problem. Some of the other things that we found out along the way were interesting because we didn't find them out from the usual suspects. What we started to do was invite in unusual suspects into the process. So we invited in, for example, the women's design team from Victoria's Secret, which would seem slightly unorthodox, but the reason why was because one of the big complaints we heard from women when we surveyed them was that they hate the gowns. that the gown they get when they go to get a mammo is the same gown you get when you're sick and you're in the hospital, and it's uncomfortable, and it's got, you know, the big open thing in the back, and there's nothing good about it, really, at all. And there's got to be a better way. So we brought in the Victoria's Secret design team, and we worked with them, and we put together a couple solutions, and maintaining the same price point for developing the current gowns that the hospitals already had, we were able to develop better gowns that were more spa-like, that were a little more demure, that were able to be a little more comfortable, able to keep people a little more warm. It's a really small little thing, but it made a huge difference in the experience for people as they went and got an exam. One of the other findings we came across, which was astronomical, was that the first complaint everyone says is that it's painful, like just in terms of percentages. So it's about 85% of the women surveyed say that the reason they don't get screened regularly is psychologically they just remember how painful it was last time, and so they put it off. And so a year becomes 18 months, becomes maybe 24 before they go back, and that's not a great thing. So the problem we ran into is that we're not allowed to change the machine because it takes 8 years. If we in this room, and probably in this room we could, come up with a better way to detect breast cancer, it would still be 8 years before it would be on a machine, working on a patient in a hospital. And GE needed market share ticks faster than that. So the machine was sort of off limits to us. So with one hand tied behind our back, we go into the second question, or the second biggest complaint that we hear, which is that the rooms are freezing cold. Almost every woman, it was around the same percentage, it was about 80% of the women surveyed said the rooms are freezing cold. So the first question we asked is why? And so we go to the hospital technicians, and the hospital technicians say, well, hospital admin really sets temperatures here, and so you should go talk with them because, I mean, it has to do with the machines and this and that. So we go to admin, and they say, well, you know, when we buy the machines from GE, they say these are the temperatures the room should be set at. And we go to GE, and we talk with the engineers, and eventually you get back to the engineer conversation, which is, well, that's the optimal temperature for the lifespan of the machine, 64 degrees Fahrenheit. It's cold. Yeah. And so because it's so cold and because there's no reason for it other than the machine, but no one in that entire process is an advocate for the patient. Through no fault of their own, again, it's just the way the system had been built. And so engineers make machines and they give them to salespeople and they give them to hospitals and they give them to doctors. But no one said 64 degrees is really cold, guys. This may be not the best scenario for a patient to be comfortable. So we just asked that question. And so we went to Memorial Sloan Kettering, who we were working with, and we were able to work through them to run a clinical trial. And we brought back women who had been screened in the past 60 to 90 days for another round of screenings. And we did different temperature fluctuations. And our hypothesis was that as the room gets warmer, we will get less complaints of pain. And that was true. But that was not the surprising finding. The more surprising finding was that by increasing the temperature, we were also able to increase the efficacy of the test by almost 10%. Because when your muscles are cold and dense, light, which is the way these machines work, does not travel as efficiently through the breast tissue as when it's warm and loose. And so the fact that we discovered that's frightening, first of all. But we did. And we did because we were being empathetic, because we wanted to figure out how to make a better thing for these patients. And then, lo and behold, we find this massively interesting set of findings. And that was just an anecdotal piece. There were several others that we found through the process as well. So we came back to GE and said, well, we found out some really interesting stuff, and we found out this and that, and we also have been working in parallel to develop an iPad app that lets patients control the lighting, the visuals, even the scent of the room. And you could, through Bluetooth, put up, you know, a video that's on your phone, or you could atomize a scent that would make you feel more comfortable in the room. And for a mammo, it's not a very long process, but if you're dealing with MRI or something like that, to be able to have that type of customization in a room makes a big difference for patients. And so what we said to GE was, look, we can't change the machines, as you know, but what we can do is add a service layer to your business. So now when you sell a machine to a hospital, you can also offer to design a GE Women's Center. And that Women's Center, much like how birthing centers have become sort of a marketing vehicle for hospitals, I want to have my baby at St. Luke's because they've got doulas and birthing rooms and this and that, GE now sells women's centers to hospitals where you have better art on the walls, a better lexicon, the robes are better, the magazines aren't expired, the temperature's right, all of the things that actually are the soft science around making it a better patient experience. So we went to the Radiological Society of North America's annual convention. If no one's busy, Thanksgiving weekend in Chicago, that's where that's happening. And so we presented our findings there, and we didn't, Jeff Immelt, the chairman of GE, did, in a keynote, and 10 hospitals on the spot signed up to start prototyping this with them. And so in one presentation, they were able to capture 10 new customers and not just outfit them with new machines, but also add a layer of revenue, add a layer of service, and add a layer of thought leadership to their business that is really helping them change their trajectory inside medical imaging. So that's the GE story. And then the last one is Nike. So we've worked with Nike now for a while, and they're an interesting organization because they have a subset of an organization inside them called Energy. And Energy's job is when Nike is launching a new special product of some kind, so when they launched Flyknit or when they launched the Fuel Band or things like that, Energy is essentially like an internal SWAT team that's dedicated to launching that product. And they work on it very heavily for the first 6 months to very literally build energy and anticipation and buzz and excitement for this product's introduction to market. And after that, they sort of fade into the distance, and then the marketing teams surround it and continue on the course forward. And so we were asked to help launch Hyperfeel for them. And Hyperfeel is a shoe that is based on their Flyknit technology. So this entire shoe, the entire upper, so not the sole, but everything else, is sewn together by one continuous thread. So it's a massive innovation story for them because it's made in one factory as opposed to about 4 to 5, which is typically how many factories it takes to actually assemble a shoe. And you can imagine the carbon footprint of that as you ship leather from one and glues and this and that, and it starts to become a really big mess. So this is super efficient, but it's also ultra lightweight. It's extremely comfortable and form-fitting. And the most important thing, which is what Hyperfeel was based on, was this idea of barefoot running. And so Nike's point of view on this was that the more your foot can be connected to the ground, the more engaged your brain is in the act of running, because the more you feel. And they had done a ton of studies in this area, and they had brought in a bunch of athletes, and they did all of the neurological studies necessary to say, yes, that's true. The more you can feel with the sole of your foot, the more engaged your mind is in the act of running. So this becomes a big deal. And they want to launch this in an interesting way. And they want to be able to talk to people who are not professional runners, who are not Olympic athletes exclusively, although there was that conversation too, about all of these advances, and do it in an interesting and compelling way. And so we launched it for them in New York during Fashion Week, uncomfortably for this person, but basically the idea was we wanted to suspend some senses and heighten other senses in order to let them feel, to empathically really understand what this shoe does for them. And so we built this 4,000 square foot dark box that people walked into, and we said, okay, welcome, take your shoes and socks off, and we're going to put a sensor on your brain. And thousands of people did it. And so we started by basically having these people come in, and the lights go off, and it's pitch black, and it's a labyrinth, 4,000 square feet, and you've got your feet to lead you through. And we say, just follow the textures. And as you walk across grass, and wet rocks, and sand, and concrete, and rubber, and all of these other things. And then there are little sensors, so she hits this spot, and we have the little hidden camera so she doesn't know it's there, and then all of a sudden all these lights swing around her, and she's kind of stimulated. And we have an ear thing in her ear that's playing music that kind of goes with the course, so as she's in certain points, it's playing different types of music that stimulates her engagement in that part of the space. And as she goes through the whole thing, we're monitoring her brainwaves. And these people walk through, and again, this was dark, and then all of a sudden, everything clicked on, photo gets captured, but these people are experiencing this entire thing through their feet. No visuals until these things pop on. And what ends up happening is people start to really dwell, first of all. We imagine 2 to 3 minutes, someone will get through the thing and they'll be done. We had some people who were in there 15, 20 minutes, just really enjoying the process of kind of that sensory deprivation tank kind of thing that they were going through. And when they came out the other side, they were greeted by this. And this was a data visualization of their brain's activity as they went through this experience. And then there was someone there to explain to them that, well, the pink is actually when you were on the grass, and the yellow is actually when you were on asphalt. And so you started to understand where your brain is most engaged through its feet. So that if you're actually a runner and you're interested in this, maybe running on grass is actually much better for you and you should go to Prospect Park or Central Park versus running on the High Line where it's going to be asphalt just pounding on your foot. And so people started to learn what barefoot running could actually mean to their engagement in running and to the experience that they have with running. And so they sold out. They sold out of all of their products in one day. Hyperfeel has gone on to become touted as Nike's most innovative technology. It's being used in pro sports, it's being used in the Olympics, and it's being used at a consumer level across a variety of different categories, but running is still very much at the top of that list. So I chose these 3 examples because, as I said in the beginning, there are 3 very different scenarios for how empathy can be brought to bear in the realm in which we deal with it. And so I will now sort of wrap up the soliloquy and happy to answer questions or talk about this a little bit more. It's an area that's super fascinating for me, so I'm happy to just dig into it with folks if you have any further questions. But thank you for your attention.
How does the attitude towards like presenting and empathic design relate to your company's own relationship to the market atmosphere?
So it's not extremely common. Like, I think when we go in and talk to a client about this, there are 2 reactions we have. Either one is, thank God someone's talking about this, let's really roll up our sleeves and get into it. Or they're like, we have to pay for that. And there's really no in between. But eventually they do pay for it, because I think what they realize is you take them through a couple cases and they start to see how this work can actually be meaningful to their business. Are there other companies that do this? Yes, for sure. The difference, I think, with us is that, so 10 years ago when I started the company, we were purely an executional agency, right? So we were designing the space that you just saw for Nike, or we were building websites, or we were writing scripts and shooting content. But we were always inheriting a brief that would set us up to create that. And your work can only be as good as the brief you get, largely speaking. You can make it a little better, but it's never going to be, exponentially better, because you just get told this is what we need you to do. And so what we decided instead was to build a strategy practice after the fact. And that let us go further upstream, so that we weren't receiving briefs, we were writing briefs. And we were sitting at the table well before the idea was formed. And so the strategy consultants of the world and the design consultants of the world do that work too, but they usually end at the delivery of that thing, that here's your recommendation, here's your brief, but they're not executors. And so for us, what's exciting is that we have both. So I think that's a differentiator relative to other companies in the market, is that we can consult, but we can also execute. And I think that's sort of a compelling differentiator across the market. But there are people who do it on both sides.
Right. And the question was more to do with the application of your own principles of design
Of
to the
like-
marketing of your own company.
Oh, to our own company.
Right.
Sorry, I thought you meant relative to our peers. Yeah, I mean, the cobbler's kids have no shoes, right? It's always hard to work on your own stuff when you have all of these other things, but I think we've done a good job this year of doing that. And we actually did use the behavior, memory, relationships, conversation approach with our own team about 2 years ago to start to understand what could we do better. And some little things came out of that, and some things that have really hung on. I mean, one of them, which we do every month, is there's a full day every month where we do no client work, and it's completely dedicated to internal Subrosa work. And the reason why was, I mean, if you can't give your own company 12 days a year, then really that seems very short-sighted. And so those days actually become days that we really refocus on those principles and look at, are we having the right conversations in social with our constituents? What could we do better here or there, and how can we improve things? So yeah, it definitely plays a role. Yeah.
In relation to empathy, how do you feel the moral question that can often arise with advertising? Like, easy example, a cigarette company that wants to sell more cigarettes.
Yeah, we don't work with them. We're pretty, it's as cut and dry as that. There are certain categories we don't work in, or there are certain companies that will come to us, even though they may be in a category that we like, where the brief is just really not great. So I'll give you an example of that. So there was a confectionery brand, who shall remain nameless, who came to us and said, we want to build a new marketing strategy for gum, for a gum that we make. And we said, okay. Who's your target audience? And they said, kids under 13. You're like, oh, okay, so that's not the best thing in the world. But we said, let's entertain this for a moment and let's see how we could maybe make this work for us. And if they can agree to work with us along these lines, then maybe it's worth doing. And so we said, we made some moral justifications to ourselves, as one would do in a for-profit entity, where you say, you know, kids are going to chew gum anyway. What can we do to maybe think about it differently? And so one thing we said was, okay, if we're going to embark on this, can we make this the gum that is centered around an active, healthy lifestyle? Because kids are going to chew gum anyway, in large part. So can we support Little League, Pop Warner? Can we support things that are going to get kids out of the house, away from video games, and actually being active? And can we build a strategy around that? And can we help a company really sort of embrace that? And so we went to them and pitched that, and they loved it, and they hired us. And we sat down for the kickoff meeting, and we were all excited to really kind of change the game a little bit. And they said, so we loved your pitch. We loved the way you think. You guys, you nailed it. You really just you made us think differently. And so we've got an idea. And it's fill in the blank brand TV. And we just want to create amazing content that talks about all the stuff you could go out in the world and do. And we were like, no. And so we had tried to course correct it, but eventually resigned the business because that's not a type of business we want to be in.
Does that happen a lot?
No. I would say in the past 3 years, we have had that type of conversation twice, and we've turned down briefs 5 times. And putting that in perspective, we've probably won, 100 briefs, and so I mean, it's nominal relative to that.
How do you work on empathy for a new product that a consumer hasn't ever encountered? So the first two those points that you made were repositioning an existing product in
Yeah.
an existing category. But then the Nike one was a whole new product, and the consumer didn't even know the value of the product. So how do you?
Get into that work stream. It's really, I think we're kind of at a benefit in that regard because we're learning about the product in our process, right? So our discovery process is we go in, we roll up the sleeves, we do stakeholder interviews, we do some initial just sort of canvassing of the landscape. And in doing so, we basically are being the first consumers, right? And so where we stumble in that process, when someone's explaining how the shoe's made and we just don't get it, or we have to ask 5 questions, what we're actually doing is refining the communication so that by the time it gets to someone out in the world, we've already had the awkward experience with it, and we've tried to improve upon it enough so that by the time it gets there, it's a little smoother for people. So I think we're our own best beta users or beta testers in many respects because of that. And then I think the other thing we do a good job of is, and our clients usually like this, is to just challenge their preconceived notions for a new product. Like some people think that they have the best idea possible and this is going to change the world, and then when you really kind of poke at it, there's a couple holes, and they'll get self-conscious and they'll get a little reflexive at first, but then as you kind of work through it, you can actually improve the product along the way. So I think those have been 2. I know they're not. That's not a specific example, but I think methodologically those are 2 ways we've attacked that.
So were you? And with the Nike, I just got lost in the Nike story a tiny little bit because you started with it was a process, this like an interesting process.
Yes, the way they make the shoe.
The way
Yes.
they make the shoe. But you ended up with your feet can tell you more about the world, and those are 2 totally.
Yes.
Did you get there? Or
Yes, I think that's. I'm glad you tied that together better than I did because the Nike thought the story was about the process, and that was it. They were like, let's just tell them about how efficient it is and how much how much more information, and there was no empathy for the other side. Like that's not actually what someone's going to care about as much as how the shoe connects to them and makes them feel and engages them in the story you're trying to tell, which is about barefoot running. So by shifting that, and of course at the end when you kind of come out the other side and you see your visualization, someone is there to kind of tell you, and these are all made in one factory and this and that, but it's a sub-bullet of the bigger story that they were bearing the lead of because they were product people and they were excited about their product, not about the outcomes of the product.
How did you touched on this a bit earlier, but I'm just wondering, how did you build your own team at Subrosa? Are there like specific aspects of the work culture that allow you to execute these projects so well?
So the way the team has come together has been very word of mouth. And it's basically someone will come in the door with a resume, or they'll send an email and they'll say, hey, I'd love to come in and talk with someone. And we're always very amenable, because you never know where a conversation will go. We very rarely say no to a first conversation unless it's just really the wrong fit. And so someone will come in and describe their typically esoteric background. I've done this and I've done that. And they've kind of been the square peg looking for the wrong round hole to fit into for the past couple attempts at getting a job. And what ends up happening is they either stay, and they stay for a very long time, or the organism and them kind of reject each other within anywhere from 4 weeks to 6 weeks of working at Subrosa, because it is an intense environment. There's a lot of both lateral and deep thinking that has to happen. So you have to be a bit of a generalist and a bit of a specialist, and you need to know what to call on when. So I think if people are comfortable with that and they know themselves enough that how they can maneuver those two worlds, they fit in rather nicely. But those who don't, it becomes self-evident fairly quickly. Yeah, the best I can do on that.
Have you ever had a client, as an individual, say a politician or an organization, say a charity, trying to say position itself?
Yeah, actually, we have a couple organizations and charities that are led by sort of prolific individuals. In fact, this week we just signed on with a new one called Every Mother Counts, which is led by Christy Turlington, which I'm attending every meeting possible. And so we're working with her to reconcile sort of her brand image out in the world, and how does that reconcile with the cause? And how do we leverage them but not cannibalize either, right? And how does it not become Christy Turlington's charity? Or how does it how do we make sure that Every Mother Counts is supported by the amazing network and reach that she's built for herself through her career? And so those types of conversations are really interesting, and we enjoy having them. On a political side, not so much, but in terms of like celeb marketing, yeah, that happens from time to time. Yeah.
With so much conversation and awareness around consumer experience and industry experience, why do you think these big companies are missing the objectivity that you guys bring?
I think it's just really hard for a lot of these companies because they are doing a lot of different things simultaneously. And even though General Electric is an enormous company with thousands of employees around the world, their global marketing team is not. It's roughly the same size as Subrosa. So to do global marketing for that organization with a tight-knit team, you're not going to be able to be perfectly diligent in every single thing. So that objectivity and that fresh set of eyes that we can bring in on occasion really kind of just, it cleans the palette of the experience for everybody and helps us get to the right place, I think. You had a question?
Do you manage your team by a gender when you have a product that is gender focused, like the mammography?
No, to a degree. So like with the Mammo project specifically, we did have men who were working on that account. When we were doing the cancer survivor interviews and the breast exam interviews, that was a full female team, just for comfort's sake. Because two things. One, we had great talented people who were already sort of in that field. We have a former MIT Media Lab professor who focused on robotics and wearable tech, and she was a perfect fit to be leading those types of conversations. So it was okay. But we're not allergic to the idea of like, if a man needed to be in the room because they had the right expertise in our team, that wouldn't be a problem.
Can you get deeper into your culture of your own office? Like, how's the office arranged from a physical standpoint?
Oh, that's a good question.
Right?
So
you have a very creative environment, so you have to have a culture that supports that.
It does. And it's unique in so much as we spent about 3 years trying to find the building we now occupy because we had a very unique set of search characteristics. We wanted a space that had retail, commercial, and residential zoning. I'll get into that in a second. We wanted a space that was in the right neighborhood, and that was single tenant occupancy so that we could be the only people in the whole building. And we wanted to be able to afford it in New York. So at any given time, there was one on the market we could go look at, and then inevitably it wouldn't pan out, but eventually this one did. And so we have a 25,000 square foot warehouse in the West Village. And the ground floor is open to the public gallery, retail space, and maker lab. And so on a given week, we may do a lecture, we may do a gallery show, We may prototype some retail technologies in the retail shop. We have a variety of different things buzzing about on the ground floor, but it is ostensibly our most public space. The second floor is our studio. It's where 50 people work every day. Open plan, but organized by competency. And our competencies, just to digress briefly, range from every division essentially bifurcates. So within creative, we have traditional design and we have three-dimensional design. So former architects, environmental designers, things like that. Strategy, we have essentially generalists and specialists. Technology, we have, for lack of a better term, on-screen and off-screen. So off-screen being, physical computing and wearable tech and stuff like that. And then we don't have an account layer, we have producers, and the producers divide into two. Producers who meet with clients and execute work out in the world, and then field producers who have less client interaction but are very steeped in the logistics of bringing high-speed internet in, or forklifts dropping cranes, and all these kinds of like weird things that I would be the wrong person to do. And so that's the second floor, and then the third floor is a computer-less floor. So it is literally a space to think. And there's a roof deck, and there's like a proper kitchen that looks like a residential kitchen, and there's some like little living room dwell spaces, and so and that is arguably the most private of our spaces because it needs to be. It's where people get the most thinking done. So that's how it's structured.
If I can follow up,
Yeah.
so the top floor, is it kind of where you have your meetings?
Yes, yeah, conference rooms, meeting spaces are up there, but it's also some like.
So where you can have, if you need to have a conversation or whatever, and it needs to be private.
Yeah, you're not in the open plan on the second floor.
So when you talk about the open plan, because we've had in my office a lot of discussions about this, is that there's the open plan where there's 3 people clustered into a set of desks, or where there's kind of just a row and a row and a row. Or
Yep. So it's sort of pods. So each department has a office, and that office can be used for the department head, or it can be used as a war room for that team, and that depends. That's completely at their own discretion. And then it is sort of a section of desks and tables, some connected, some sitting adjacent to each other, in different parts of the space that are dedicated to each department.
just a little grouping, but
Little groupings, yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Is there any company or industry as a whole that you look at and say, man, I wish they would call me up and ask for my help?
So last year that was auto, and we just got our first like large-scale automotive client, and we're well underway with solving a lot of problems that we think exist in that category. So that was one. Another one, I thought that was mine for a second. The other one we've been talking a lot about is hospitality. I love hotel lobbies. It's a very weird thing to say, but I do, because I think they're like such like great petri dishes for what's going on. Like, do people use this hotel lobby to sit down and check their email? Do they use this hotel lobby to just come grab a bite to eat? Do they want to get their room key and get the hell out of there as fast as possible? They're a great petri dish for what the culture of that hotel or that hospitality organization has built. And some do it really well, and some do it really poorly. And so that's an area, we don't have a client in that space, but we're actively pursuing a couple conversations.
I would imagine you could come up with lots of ideas for new businesses, just in your business. I mean, just looking at the Pantone, I could come up with like 3 different things that they should be doing that are out of the scope of your
Yes.
being hired. Do you have like an idea generation kind of business on the side, or like entrepreneur?
Yes, it's hard to not have that, but it's also hard to give that the dedication it needs to be successful, because you can only spread it so thin, right? And so what we have tried to do is dedicate a portion of our annual hours as an organization to 1 to 2 projects that we think have merit outside of our clients' needs. And if we can launch them out into the world and they're successful, great. And we have access to, some of our clients are VC firms and things like that too. So if we need to go do a raise, we can entertain that. But obviously that changes a lot if we were to suddenly capitalize a piece of business, and our accounting firm is sitting right here shaking his head because he knows exactly what I mean by that. It would open up a whole new can of worms for us in some regards. But that said, we do it, and we have an entity within our entity that is structured to incentivize employees to have skin in the game for that. So if you come up with an idea, it's your idea, and we may take a portion of it to help support it and bring it to life. But it's not a Subrosa idea. It's born out of those folks.
seen any issues with you come in with an idea and say, this is what we should be communicating, this is how we should be talking to our customers, and you leave, and these people who are maybe not the same type of critical thinkers are now in charge of running with the ball? Do you ever see any problems with them sort of delving back into the way they used to behave and not?
Less so. You know, I think we don't disappear, I think is probably why, right? I think we do a good enough job of making sure that we keep up a cadence, even if we're not, like I'll give you an example with Pantone, right? So one thing we do for social media is we agree to set up your social media strategy. What are you going to do in Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and all that sort of stuff? And we agree to run it for no more than 6 months. And the plan is that by month 3, we will have learned enough that the plan is in place, and we start to recruit a full-time employee that begins working with us at Subrosa. And for 3 months, they work with us. And slowly, by month 4, month 5, the training wheels start to come off. By month 6, Pantone hires that person, and we go on to kind of a once-a-month check-in basis. And so we do that for a couple different things that are sort of going in perpetuity, so that we're not running it in perpetuity, because it's not our car, right? Like we're a good steward, we're a good navigator, but at the end of the day, it's your car, and we want to make sure you can drive yourself where you need to go. So how do you just take the training wheels off carefully? Anyone else? All right, well, thank you guys.